we're about to go live. I'm gonna mute myself. It's loading. Erica, in like 30 seconds, you can probably hit record.
Folks, we can start in a couple of minutes. Hi, folks. Right, welcome. Those joining us, hello. Hello to our friends on Facebook. Our friends joining us on Zoom as well, hello. Get started here in about a minute or so. All right, well, welcome folks. I hope you're having a wonderful Tuesday. First week in May, we've made it here. So grateful for you all joining us, those of you who are joining us on Zoom, those of you who are joining us via Facebook, and those who will be joining later on. This is the third installment of our three-part series that we have offered over the last few weeks, called Developing Our Moral Imagination, Learning from the Past to Envision the Future. And I'm excited for today. Those of you who are not aware of who we are, my name is Michael Robinson. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm the program director at NCCJ. We are a human relations organization that has called the Triad home for over 80 years. We promote understanding and respect among all cultures and races and religions through education, dialogue, and advocacy. And we work with educators, business folk, people in nonprofits, and the community at large at thinking about how we build a just and compassionate community free of bias, bigotry, and racism. We're probably best known for our flagship program, Anytown, which has helped shape and raise the awareness of young people in our community for over 30 years. And thank you to those of you, part of the Anytown family, NCCJ family, and NFJC family that have joined us over these last few weeks. The support is tremendous. Thank you so much. If you'd like to learn more about NCCJ and the work that we do, you can find us at nccjtriad.org. And if you want to learn more about Anytown, just put a / and type in Anytown as well. I have with me today Maria Perdomo. Maria is our program manager at NCCJ. She's my partner in helping to implement programs, working really closely with our youth ambassadors who are graduates of our Anytown program. Maria, can you say hi to everyone?
Hey everybody, I'm happy to be here today. Just a reminder that I'll be managing the chat boxes. So if you have a question or a comment, concern that you want to share with Michael and everyone else, let us know, and our team will manage and find a way to get back to you or share with Michael. So thank you.
Awesome. So thank you, Maria. Appreciate that. As COVID-19 began to impact our community, my colleagues and I started thinking about how NCCJ can support our community members as we learn to cope with what we're experiencing and continue to experience. while we think about what the future might look like. We knew that we wanted to stay true to our mission of bringing folks together to have conversations where we learn and to understand one another so we can build what that compassionate community looks like together. But we knew that it may not be the right time for us to do one of our typical programs. And so in that time, we developed this series so that we could better understand how the current moment is impacting how we feel, how those feelings influence our actions, and provide ways for us to think critically about what it takes to sustain and maintain a sense of compassion that's necessary to foster a strong, welcome, and inclusive community. This is the final part of that series. And if you haven't seen the other two, you can find them on our Facebook page. They're saved there. So you can go to Facebook and search NCCJ of the Piedmont Triad. And you can also find them on YouTube. We'll be dropping the link in our chat box on both platforms for folks to find them on YouTube. We'd love for you to join us to learn more about ways that what's happening in the time that we're in right now and how that's impacting our processing so that we can together build that strong community. Before we start every program, we begin with these operating assumptions. These are things that we assume of ourselves and others as we navigate the program today. One is that we're all good people. So we want you to come in with that mindset, right? You know, we are all good people. We believe that we all have a responsibility to build safe and welcome and inclusive communities. And we all have something to offer, and we all have something to learn. Also, it's important for us to know that we're not here to change you, your cultural or personal beliefs. We're not here to place shame, blame, or guilt. You know, we are where we are in this moment right now. And I want to put a disclaimer up. You know, a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is thinking about how we consider the future. But if you're not in a place to be thinking about the future right now, that's fine. Our goal isn't to tell you to do anything in particular. It's to provide a space for us to think about what we're experiencing and how we can help collectively to think about what we need personally and what each other needs in order to, as we've said, sustain and maintain an inclusive community. Because I think that is something that outside of this time we would be striving for anyway. And so this is our way of helping us think about what does that look like as we continue through this moment and into the next phase of things. You know, during our first session, we talked about how our brains help us process uncertainty, how that activates our biases, and how we can use mindfulness as a way for us to slow down, process what's happening, and make decisions that align our practices and values. The second session, we talked about the power of language, how language is integral to our development as humans, as an evolutionary trait, how it's closely tied to how we think and feel, how that impacts our actions, especially in times where the threat of disease is imminent, and fuels our biases, and discuss ways that we can practice what we preach and stay true to our values, especially when we're seeing bias happen online or in person. What might get in the way of that and how we can overcome it. In times of uncertainty, as we talked about, our brain goes to the past experience to help us make sense of the world. Language has given humans a unique ability to collect past experiences and pass them down to generations for others to benefit and learn. So this week, we will be looking at what folks that have experienced long-term confinement have learned through reflecting on the past in times where the future was uncertain, to see how we might continue to maintain the hope necessary to foster and envision compassionate and innovative solutions to our community's social challenges. Who will we be on the other side of this? And what can we learn from those that have walked the path before? So the goal today is for us to consider what a moral imagination is. You know, it was in our title. What does that mean? What do we need to develop it? And what are some practices that can help us maintain that moral imagination as we move into an uncertain future. So to start today, as a check-in on this rainy Tuesday, at least where I am, I like to get a sense for where people are. So in the chat box here on Zoom and on Facebook, what would be the first thing that you would do if safe at home orders in your area were lifted and it was safe to be 6 feet away from another individual? What are one of the first things that you're going to do or that you would do given the opportunity? Drop your comment in the chat box. So somebody said, go to the gym, visit my grandson, family gatherings, cook out with friends and family. All right. Great examples. All things that I think I would want to do. Go to the movies, give hugs, have a face-to-face conversation, right? It's been a long time. Take the kids somewhere in public, right? All great things. See some live music, beautiful. I love it. This past week, Governor Cooper, just in time for Mother's Day, which is really, I think it's awesome, said that, announced that portions of the state may be able to open up at the end of the week. Some retailers, restaurants, things like that, which could mean that safe at home restrictions would probably soon, perhaps slowly be lifted. Even though in some cases in certain parts of our community that there's still cases rising at a slower rate, but it's still the case. We can imagine that the future is going to look like a lot of still limits on things like how many people can gather in public spaces, things like that. But we're already feeling, because we've been in this, sort of pent up for the last few weeks, the draw of social proximity pulling us in, right? We're craving physical connections of friends and family members, neighbors. We're eager to reignite bonds that have been placed on hold for the last few weeks. But this, quite honestly, the lifting of these, our ability to be mobile, maybe the silver lining in the situation is still very uncertain. Over 1 million people have filed for unemployment in North Carolina since March 15th. That's 20% of North Carolina's workforce. Over 30 million people have filed for unemployment nationwide. Students across the country and across the world are experiencing what one GCS board member put as glacial learning losses due to school closures, which, according to the Brooks Institute, could result in a 12% decrease in GDP. And if you're like me and you're like, I don't know what GDP means. GDP is how we pay for things like healthcare and environmental practices or protections and education. So less GDP means there's less money to go around for things where we're already seeing disparities and inequities. Let alone the fact that we're mourning the loss of thousands of people in communities across the country and the globe, and losing perhaps the legacy and wisdom of generations as the most heavily hit by the pandemic are those in our elderly communities. So that question of who will be on the other side of this isn't just an intellectual exercise that we're bringing people through to distract us. It's something that I think is an important question for us to consider as we think about us moving forward. How do we come together, and how do we make sure that we how we support one another as we continue to walk down this path of the unknown. So our goal, so with that, how we're going to do that today is we're going to talk about what a moral imagination is, again, developing that moral imagination, and then sustaining a moral imagination through this time. So before we move on, I'd like to stop to see if there's any questions or comments before we dive into the next piece. All right. So I'm sure you're tired of people talking about how these are unprecedented times. Most of us can understand that from an anecdotal standpoint. We've seen traditions and expectations and cultural norms slip. Hugs and handshakes are now, harmful to our health. Um, and this cultural shift can have us thinking about the normalcy of the past. We just want things to go back to how they were, so things can be normal. As spring rolls by, and it gives way to summer, a lot of the things that we be doing, the traditions, gatherings, celebrations, they're falling off the calendar. What are some things that over this time that you've had to sacrifice or you've missed out on because of the physical distancing, things that you would normally be doing, or that have had to be rescheduled or shifted because of this time? Drop those into the chat box. Travel, a lot of travel plans, graduations, right? These things that are just sort of part of the way that we have done things, and now they've been brought to a halt for good reason. We can justify the reason. We know it's a good reason, but it's still it's a lot, right? Birthday celebrations, baby showers, these sorts of things. The present has a way of reinventing the past in our memory based on what we're currently experiencing. Psychologists say that with each recall, our memories are being reconstructed and making them less like a file in a folder or in a cabinet, and more like a story that's being revised and edited over time. That means that the past looks better or worse depending on our current state. Researchers at the Mount Sinai School of Medicine say that memory is what we are now, not in pictures, not in recordings. Your memory is who you are now. It's easier for us to look back and think that things were better then, but we only need to sit with that idea for a little while to see that there are cracks in it. Right now it's mosquito season. There's some things can happen at the cookout that we don't expect. That refund check may have already been gone if you weren't sitting at home, right? Or maybe speaking for myself. But the fact of the matter is, with all that said, there are a number of issues, there are a number of problems, a number of things that we're seeing that bubble up that are getting attention now that are only exacerbated by the situation that we're in. North Carolina still ranks in the top 10 of food scarcity across the nation. There's still racial inequities in our schools. The fact is, we don't know how this is going to impact, what the impact this is going to have on us now, and what it can mean for issues we've been trying to fight for the future, or for a very long time. And so as we think about, okay, how do we continue to build a resolve as these things build up? How do we continue to build a resolve that we need to foster a safe, welcoming, and compassionate community, while the idea of what that community will look like and how we'll be able to interact is yet to be known? One of the ways that we can do this is by developing a moral imagination. This idea of shaping and thinking about the future in a way that considers how we who we want to be in that future. Now, before we dive into it, I want to take some time to actually kind of break down the term, because it may be new to folks. When you hear the term moral mentioned, what sorts of things come to mind for you all? Drop your ideas into the chat box. What ideas come to mind when you hear, or when the term moral is mentioned? Where do you see those kind of ideas pop up? What we should do, must do, integrity, goodwill, values, beliefs, the right thing to do, right? All good things, right? Ethical, better for all, very nice. right? When we're talking about moral, we're thinking about ideas of right and wrong, right? How we behave, what's fair, what's honest. And it's something that's always been negotiated depending on the particular time or place that we're in. Something that may have been acceptable when you were growing up may not be the case now. It's not a static idea, something that's sort of out there that is present when, depending on the circumstance, but it's more so the way that we see and think about things. And that's something that's malleable and adaptable over time. Now, how about imagination? What comes to mind when that term is mentioned? Imagination. Creativity. Sky is the limit. Thinking outside of the box. Envision the design of the future. Seeing what is unseen to others, thoughts based in reality. Being creative. Thank you for our friends on Facebook. Right? Exactly. Excuse me. Imagination involves forming new ideas and creating images or concepts that don't yet exist based on things that we've seen before. Imagination is like an essential element to innovation, which is something that we really need in times like this. We're coming up with new ideas to address problems that we didn't know were there before right now, right? So the moral imagination, we put these two ideas together. The definition Mark Johnson uses is envisioning the full range of possibilities in a particular situation in order to solve an ethical challenge. To use our imaginations to create solutions to existing problems using tools and techniques that are formed based on what we learn over time. It's a process of looking forward, but taking into account the past, what it means for what needs to happen now to change or impact the future. So we're looking forward by looking back so that we can think about what needs to happen now so that we can impact the future in positive ways. We've already seen evidence of this happening in our communities, from teens developing delivery services for neighbors in need, the folks making face masks to help themselves and others stay safe. What are some other ways that you've seen, some other creative ways that you've seen people responding to or meeting the needs of themselves and others in this time? You can drop those ideas in the chat box. Some ways we've seen some people being creative. I didn't know so many people could sew. Well, you've seen some wonderful artistry there. Calls to seniors living home alone, not able to get out. Wonderful. Wonderful connection to folks who may not be able to get through in this sort of digital platform, right? Very good. Any other thoughts, any other ways? Converting worship service to virtual ones, right? Drive-through services, things like this, right? Some real creative ways for folks to be able to still engage in some of the activities that are central to how we get along, how we see things. Pick up service for fresh food and farmers, yes, right? So getting food, getting fresh produce to people. All the creative things being done for high school seniors, right? Seeing placards outside on people's yards, things like this to celebrate young people. Return to making our own bread, gardens, things like this. Kindness to others in grocery stores. even when you don't feel like it, right? I hear you, Libby. That's good, right? What this speaks to is the capacity that we have as a species to learn, as people, to learn, adapt, and respond by doing what we need in order to survive. But once we've risen out of survival mode, it can be easy for this sense of public care to atrophy, and for it to lose its strength. As our priorities recalibrate to fit the needs of a current situation. Like what happens if things right now would just come back online, right? it's important for us to consider then what this time has given us that we can take forward into developing this moral imagination. So I know if you're like me, this is certainly giving me some time to do some things that I normally don't, which is honestly just having some time. And I want to know from your perspective, what's one thing, or what are some things that you may be paying attention to, or that you've noticed for the first time since safer at home orders were put in place in your area? What's something that, because you've been made or asked to stay at home, that you're noticing that maybe you haven't noticed in a while, or perhaps for the first time? You can drop those ideas in the chat box. Self-care and discovery. I've got some artistry out here, Tom. I see, right? Can paint. When under less stress, connections are more purposeful. That's wonderful. Some other thoughts. Pay more attention to bird behavior and gardening more. Me too. We have a wren in our bathroom. We have a nice little home. Handwritten personal notes, right? We're slowing down. We're able to do some things that we normally feel like we don't have the time to do. So less sleep deprived, getting more rest in some cases. We are programmed. Thank you so much for your responses, folks. I really appreciate your engagement. We're programmed to think about the future, and in many ways, that ability has to plan for the future, predict it, make projections, has helped us survive. Our increasingly fast-paced and technological environment makes it feel like decisions that we need to make need to happen instantaneously, and that every decision about the future, which is like any moment besides what's happening right now, needs to happen right now. Something that many of us have had to adjust to in this period of time is having time, quite honestly. And how do we use that space in our day that would usually be taken up by things like driving to work, or dropping somebody off at practice, or going to practice, shopping outings, meeting people for coffee. If you're like me, you're probably noticing, and I see there's a lot of people have shared here, that there's a lot of things that you normally don't get the time to pay attention to. That this paying attention, this time that we're given, this is essential for us to develop and sustain a moral imagination. Because if we don't know what's happening, then we aren't able to respond appropriately. We don't have the time to do what we need to do to make things better, or to mend, or to heal. That additional time that some of us have been granted may have also given us time to consider things like what's important to us. What are our priorities? I know friends of mine and myself, we've really appreciated having more time with family. Thinking about things like someone mentioned in the chat, self-care, things we normally don't have the time to really consider. And it's granted us an opportunity to consider things that, like, what's really truly meaningful in life. I see that someone's time allows us to respond instead of react. I appreciate that, Tom. Thank you. Viktor Frankl, who's probably best known for his memoir, Man's Search for Meaning, which counts his experience in 3 concentration camps during the Holocaust, says that to find meaning in life is the primary, most powerful, motivating, and driving force in humans. And that we can discover this meaning in life in 3 different ways: by creating a work or doing a deed, doing something for someone else, finding our purpose in life, experiencing something or encountering someone. Like, I know my idea of meaning shifted once I had a child. You may shift once you find that loved one, that person that you care for. And by the attitude that we take toward unavoidable suffering. We're going to talk about that in a second. One of the stories he tells in his memoir is of an experience where another prisoner, early one morning, it was cold, they're about to go out on detail to do some work, and friend leans over to him and says, "If only our wives could see us now." You know, he's in Auschwitz. He's been in this concentration camp for years at this point, separated from his wife. And he says that that comment conjured an image of his spouse that was then more luminous than the sun, which was beginning to rise. And that helped him realize that the salvation of man is through love and in love. In times like this, sometimes it can be hard to think about, like, can I smile? Can we be happy? Can we see the beauty in things? But the time that we are given, it gives us an opportunity to slow down, to see some of those things and make the connections that I'm seeing people make. I'd like to know, from your perspective, what are some of the things that you learned in this time? What's gained more meaning for you? What's something that perhaps you were taking for granted that now you see differently because of the situation? If you would do us the honor of adding that to the chat box, what are some things that you are finding more meaning in these days? I know that for me, it's one of the things that I've found more meaning in is silence. No pun intended. The idea that quiet is an okay thing to embrace. Through his experiences, Frankel was able to come to the idea that everything, and this is sort of to his last point around how we find meaning in life. Everything, he says, can be taken from a person, but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. In this, I believe he means that we, in times like this, we have to choose hope, and something that he calls a tragic optimism in spite of our trying circumstances. As we go forth into the unknown, hope is something that we can keep close to us in order to keep us upright. Meaning, however we find it, is something that can be deeply personal to us, but in a diverse community, it's important to consider how our thoughts and actions that stem from this meaning impact those around us, and that others may have ideas about what the future looks like that need to be considered as much as, and in some cases, more so than our own. Jean-Paul Lederach says that moral imagination requires the capacity to imagine ourselves in a web of relationships, one that includes even our enemies. We have to see our fate tied to that of our neighbor. If this has taught us one thing, it's that everything that we touch makes an impact, whether we intend it to or not. And the impact is not always what we intend. Being mindful is important because it ensures that we're taking into consideration how our thoughts, words, and actions impact ourselves and others, even those that we don't necessarily consider part of our circle. What we want for ourselves, we have to want for others. This entails what the Dalai Lama calls a sense of compassion, that is a sense of caring, a sense of concern for others' difficulties and pain, not only family and friends, but all other people, enemies also, a compassion born through understanding. In order to gain understanding, we have to practice deep listening, contemplation, mindfulness, right? These things we talked about in previous sessions. Going within, right? Thinking about, taking time with ourselves, with the people that are near us, observing things, understanding, gaining an understanding of ourselves and our surroundings, helps us learn and develop that compassion that influences each decision that we make. Now, concentration, practice, these sorts of things aren't things that are deeply embedded in how we think about our day-to-day. Not all of us, at least. In order for us to learn how to develop that sense of how deep looking, how listening, how being quiet, all the things that we've talked about, mindfulness, how these things how folks have developed that sense through choice or who've been forced to be in confinement, how that time has helped them develop and keep track of practices and strategies that they've used to develop and maintain a sense of compassion and imagination for the possibilities of what seems like an unlikely future, right? An unknown future, when we don't know what we don't know about tomorrow. Before we go into this next section, I'd like to pause here to see if anybody has any questions or any comments about the moral imagination, Viktor Frankl, this idea of finding meaning in a time like this, how we frame our mindset as we move forward into the next phase of the moment. Go back and read some of the responses to some of the things people have said that they've been noticing, been learning subtleties in life, feeling a connection to place, space, and home, right? Feeling connected to something. On Facebook, to give a simple, friendly hug, right? Power of a smile. Our friend Ivy. Is it Tuesday? It is, isn't it? Thank you for those responses, folks. So, Ivy says, when in doubt, put your teeth out. Yes. Thanks. So, again, what can we learn from people like Viktor Frankl, who've been in experiences that may make this situation that we're in personally seem out of this world, to think, if you're in a situation that is dire, life and death, right? How do you still maintain a sense of hope in that time to fix the problems that you're victim to, even in some case, right? You're the person who's being inflicted on. How can you stay even in the fight for a better tomorrow, right? Shaka Senghor spent 19 years behind bars for a murder that he committed at the age of 19. Shaka's memoir, Righting My Wrongs, Life, Death, and Redemption in an American Prison, recounts his story of growing up in Detroit during the crack epidemic in the 80s, how the choices he made during that time led to Shaka, who was then James White, being convicted of murder in the second degree and sentenced to 15 to 40 years in prison. While in prison, Shaka, through a process of deep introspection, learned the concept of forgiveness and mentorship, relied on a number of the ideas that I'm going to share here to learn how to love himself, forgive himself, transform his thinking, so that he could transform his community and make amends for the harm he caused prior to incarceration. This is a wonderful book. He's a wonderful speaker. I recommend, if we can drop his website into the chat box, that would be beautiful, because he's a wonderful story. But I want to share some of the things that he talks about as important to him, as he spent 7 years in solitary confinement during that 19 years, how he was able to use that time as a way of doing some introspection for us to think about some of the things we might be able to use, some tools we might be able to bring out of that to continue to think about how we, again, maintain compassion, develop that so that we can have a future that we all want to see, where people can thrive and survive, more than survive, actually. So there's 3 things. You might hear my baby crying in the background. She must not be getting something that she really wants. The first thing that Shaka talks about his education. He said he read books that helped him understand his circumstances and gave him the language he needed to help him make different decisions, not necessarily better ones, no judgment, right? That education gave him a sense of self and an alternative to what he had been conditioned to be and how he learned to respond. Like Frankel says, right? There's a thing that we have, a choice that we have between the response and when we are confronted with something, right? That slowing down that process, that's what makes us who we are. We have to be weary, like we talked about in previous sessions, of the idea of confirmation bias and only having how we feel or see things related to our current situation reinforced. We have to resist the recall of normalcy, which can keep us complacent and unintentionally perpetuating issues and problems we wish to transform. The idea is not to just we can learn a lot of new things, but it's important in times like this for us to go back to the past and to learn things that we can use to help create a collective solution to problems that we want to help fix in the future, and not to just create a facsimile of what the past is, right? That we want to keep replicating problems in the present, in the future that we hope to see. This is and you've as you can see, this whole session is sort of about reflection, right? What are we learning in this time that we don't want to just stay here? In a meeting I had yesterday, one of the members mentioned that we have some people finding balance in life that perhaps they never had before, right? What are some things that you learned in this time that you learned about, perhaps that again, not just that before this, the idea of something that we're noticing that we weren't noticing before, right? But maybe you've had some time to do some study or to do some learning or to really get into something that you normally wouldn't have the time to. What's something that you learned that's helped to inform how you see the world, see yourself, see other people in this time? Drop those answers into the chat box. How precious each life is. Thank you, George. That I think that we take some things for granted, that they're just a given, right? Pretty good. Interconnectedness, not an abstract concept, but a certainty. Thank you, Candace. For sure. Like I said earlier, everything we touch makes an impact, right? Something that I think I was just using as a figure of speech before now. Right? Hope based in faith, God, and humanity. How adaptable people are and how quickly. Yes, very much so. Very much so. Very good. Excuse me. Go back. So one of the other things that helped Shaka during his incarceration was writing. Writing, as we mentioned in session 2, is how we've been able to pass ideas down through the generations, and what we can look back to help govern our decisions about the present and the future. As a personal practice, it helps us see our own development over time and gives us insight into our own perceptions that influence our perspective. Shaka said that writing allowed him to open up to the idea of atonement, and as he used it as a tool to understand his past, the decisions he had made that did not align with the person he felt himself to be, and started him on the journey to make amends for his actions and heal so that he could end the cycle of hurt and violence that plagued his adolescence. One of the things that you might consider doing during this time, if you're not somebody who journals, is perhaps picking up a practice. As an option, you can use this as a prompt. If you're someone who journals regularly, or if you're someone who maybe just needs some headspace, some time to really just etch out 5 minutes or so to just sit with some things that you've been discovering about yourself and capture those thoughts in your experience. This is a prompt you might want to use. What's something that you've discovered over the last few weeks in social distancing or physical distancing? And just take some ideas down, just like we've done here, things that we've learned that we're going to take forward. The goal here is not to think about progression, like am I better than I was the last time I journaled, or whatever. Have I seen a change in my mood or how I feel? But rather to take an inventory of how we see things based on where we are and what's happening that's helping you be where you'd like to be, and or perhaps can keep you on track, right? So if we think about how we want to experience this life, how we want to experience things, what we want to see, how we want to act, and we're able to keep track of it, then we can have a record of saying, hey, this is, I notice these things are happening whenever I'm in this sort of, having this sort of experience, whenever I'm in this kind of mood or I'm in this kind of space. And that way we can help ourselves show up how we want to show up in the world, and make help the society as a whole be more harmonious. Our friends over at Yoke and Abundance, Alicia, has some wonderful tips on how to do some journaling exercises and mindfulness, things like that. I would recommend that you check out their site for some wonderful guidance there. The last thing that Shaka mentions is mentorship. He says that his mentors, the people that played a crucial role in his life, because they force him to look at his life honestly and to challenge himself about his decision making. It's not always easy for us to take advice. I admit it's not always easy for me either. And we've had a lot of conditioning that tells us that not knowing isn't a good place to be. But in order for us to learn and grow, we have to humble ourselves to embrace what we don't know, letting go, and sometimes letting go of being right, so that we can learn from folks who walked these paths before and who guided us. It's important for us to recognize that this idea of moral imagination is not new. It's not like something that we have to consider right now. It's something that has always been a part and parcel of the human experience. It's born out of suffering and hoping for a future where suffering is no longer a possibility for those after us. We want to make things better for the ones who come after. It's that moral imagination of those that came before us, often that doesn't always get acknowledged or honored, that shapes the world that we take for granted. And it's to them that we can look for in times like this to show us the way. And so here's a challenge that I have for folks, right? Take it up if you wish. This is not something we're asking you or making you do. This is something that I thought would be something in this time where we're not able to be with people. Mother's Day is coming up. Hey, Mom, might not be able to see you this weekend, right? But I want you to think of someone from your past, a parent, your teacher, a mentor that helped shape and develop you into the person that you are today. And write them a letter thanking them for having faith in the unknown potential, that having that moral imagination, perhaps to believe in you or give you a shot or give you an opportunity that help get you to this place. And maybe that's just a comment that someone made. Maybe that's just a pat on the back. Maybe it was a good job that they don't know. They planted that seed that now has grown into the abundance of that you are. this is something that, as I think someone mentioned, we're calling folks who aren't able to connect to these platforms like this. It's a great way for us to perhaps connect and say thank you for the contribution to the future, the belief in it. Some great things in the chat box. One of the final things that was an integral part of Shaka's transformation was forgiveness. He says that his transformation didn't really begin until a few years into his incarceration, when he received a letter from the godmother of the person that he murdered, which part of it read, "What I want you to know, other than these things," you mentioned some things in the letter, "painful things that you brought upon my family, is that I love you and I forgive you." This idea of forgiveness is something that is important for us to consider as we move through this time, right? What are the things? What are some of the things that we've gained, the joy that we felt, the love we've been able to share? What has this revealed about things that we want, that has reignited our desire to want to help and create, again, a safe and welcoming community for all people? In order for us to continue to practice this, in order to maintain this, we have to be vigilant about keeping up some of these practices. And it isn't easy. Again, this is not a, you need to be doing something in particular session. It's, what have people done to get them through seemingly uncertain times that have kept them going to the next day and the next day and the next day? And that's doing self-reflection to get a sense of themselves that they can do it. And perhaps sometimes that's finding hope outside of ourselves until we can find it within. We have to commit to slowing down and providing periods to pause and assess whether the decisions that we're making are creating the path that we set out to create, and ask the appropriate and sometimes tough questions to assess whether the decisions that we're making have led us to where we thought we would be. And if so, what we did that got us there. What mistakes did we make that turned out to be great discoveries, and which cost us dearly? And if we're not where we want to be, if we look back and we say, this isn't what we said we wanted to be, or this is what we said we were going to do, then it gives us something to look back on and say, then what do we need to do to get us back on track, to realign ourselves, right? Gently. Life, as Alan Watts says, is like a great dance. The goal is not to end on a particular place on the dance floor. It's to enjoy the dance. Who we are doing the dance determines the quality of the experience. Elaine Boulding is a sociologist, and she says that we must embrace what she calls the 200-year present. What you see on the screen is a sculpture that was created by Julia Goodman, inspired by this idea of the 200-year present. Elaine says that the 200-year present began 100 years ago with the year of the birth of the people who have reached their 100th birthday today. Happy birthday. The other boundary of the 200-year present is 100 years from now, and that's the 100th birthday of the babies born today. Happy birthday. So with that in mind, this idea of the 200-year present, when we're looking back 100 years, where we are now, looking forward 100 years. Yes, I can give you a message for that, maybe. I have one more thing for us to think about before we wrap up today. So we're looking forward, okay? What is something that you hope the next generation can look back on and say that we did now that contributes to their world being a more fair and just society? What will the next generation say about us and what we did in this time to make it a better place? What are some things that you hope come out of this that people who look back, as when we look back on this time, we can say, you know, we can be proud of that. Please write some of those in the chat box. A more spot said, vote. Equal access to healthcare, the importance of work of educators, treating educators fairly and justly. Thank you. Marriage equality, how we came together as a human race to support and encourage one another. Proud that we're able to pivot from the old way into more innovative thinking. A more tolerant society without personal prejudices. I love that. That we figured out how to make sure students have the technology they need in schools to be successful. Thank you, Ivan. Yes. Thank you all so much. Our hope for this series has been that it has given us an opportunity to understand what we're facing and what we're experiencing and what is influencing how we feel, how we think, how we act. Because when we become more aware of why we act the way we act, we can do something about it. We're maybe more motivated to do something about it. We take more ownership of it. The idea of what it means for us to be in community is something that is always shifting and always changing and always, it is malleable. This moral imagination is something that we are developing every day, and each and every one of us has an integral part in it because we hold the keys to forming what that looks like, because we control our own thinking, we control our response to the world. And just like choosing to be a part of this experience over the last 3 weeks, we all have a choice in the matter. And I am grateful to be in a community of people that are thoughtful, that work to make themselves and therefore the community that they call home a better place. We hope that you were able to find this series helpful and relevant for you in this time of transition and change. We look forward to continuing to be in community with you and to gain insight and collectively create a world where injustices are healed and every human can flourish as the thing that they are. Thank you all very much for your time. And if you would please share these, they're open for our community. And I look forward to, again, being able to see you all soon. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us on Facebook. again, you can find this series on YouTube and on Facebook at NC. Just search for NCCJ. Before we jump off the call, Maria, our program manager, has shared a survey monkey with everybody on Zoom. If you could please fill that survey out for us so we can get some feedback on this to see how we can make some adjustments, the things that work for you all, and get your suggestions for future programming. Karen, we'll see about that. I'm glad you found it relevant. Thank you. Thank you all so much. We appreciate you so much. Thank you.